Hi, I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the astrologers for the Planetary calendar, and this is one of our astro portraits. Now, if you don't know the Planetary calendar, it's published since 1949. It really tells you what's going on. You can find us at planetarycalendar.com, and you can find these portraits and our forecast every Friday for the coming week at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube. So please go there and subscribe. Click the little red button. You'll get the forecasts when they come up. Now, the portrait this week is part of our action series. We did a whole series of actresses that did action roles and the similarities in their charts. And someone said, hey, what about the men? So we started the series of men who do a lot of action roles. And we did one with Chis Evans just before here, who was from a younger generation. Now we're going to one from the older generation, Liam Neeson. Born June 7th, 1952 at 9:55 p.m. BST in Ballymakery in the British Isles. He's born obviously in Gemini with his sun at 17 degrees Gemini. He's got Mercury and Venus close to the sun in a little trilogy there, all in Gemini. He's got Sagittarius Rising, which means he's born with the sun in the 7th house. He's someone who naturally is always looking for partners. He always wants to find people to work with. He's just looking to fulfill that. And this is interesting. This is actually something had similar to Chis Evans, who is also a Gemini. He has the moon rising. But where Chis Evans had Scorpio rising, Liam Neeson has Sagittarius rising. So he's more optimistic and outgoing. And it's the moon in Sagittarius rising just from 12 degrees to 18 degrees Sagittarius rising. So just above the horizon and the beginning of what's called the Golan spot. It's a place where it has a lot of leverage. Up at his midheaven, this is another thing he had in common with Chris, is he has a midheaven in the 11th house, which means that part of his reason for wanting to be that in that career was, one, making a lot of money. He really liked the idea of making a lot of money. 11th house, the money you earn, but also being part of a community. He also has Saturn in Libra, which is something Chis Evans has, and Neptune in Libra. He's part of that Saturn, Neptune, and Libra generation that happened 51, 52, which is kind of the core line, the center of the boomers, because it has to do with being willing to work on big projects cooperatively and fairly. A very strong sense of fairness, a very great belief in laws and fairness, because Neptune, the planet of belief, is there with Saturn, the planet of structure, and it's Saturn in Libra, the exalted position. In some ways, people feel it's the strongest position for Saturn. It's not really, but it's the nicest position. Let's put it that way, because it's graceful. Now, when you look at the chart, he's born just 5 degrees off the full moon. He's a full moon child, which means he has a very full expression of his emotions, which, of course, you want in an actor in a performance. Funny, people a lot of times who have the moon at the rising, you find a lot of novelists. A lot of people who are very good at creating stories and creating their own little world. So it shows a great deal of imagination. Now, Gemini is a sign that shows up a great deal in action figures, you might say, and people who are involved in that. Because, as we oftentimes describe, they're one of the pawns of the zodiac. They like going out there and getting into stuff. They change directions real fast. They're very quick to say, okay, well, what's going to be funny? What's going to be witty? It's a very witty sign, especially because he has Mercury in rulership in Gemini. Now, because Mercury's in rulership, it makes the other two planets there, the Sun and the Venus, stronger. It makes them more extrovert. It makes them more acting out in the world. He has Jupiter in the 6th house in Taurus. And that's important because, remember, the rising and the moon are in Sagittarius. So they're related to the Jupiter, which is in the 6th house in Taurus, the earthy sign. This is someone who probably likes to eat, but probably likes to cook. With Jupiter and Taurus in the 6th house, don't you think this is someone who would like to cook? Likes all the processes of it, likes feeding other people. He has Ceres there as well. He has Hygeia there, so he's real interested in cooking healthy food probably. Food right out of the garden, probably likes to garden. But it's interesting because it grounds this personality that otherwise is all air and fire. It's a air, Sun, Mercury, and Venus, and Gemini, fire, Moon, and Ascendant. This is air and fire. Jupiter, interestingly, is opposite. It's not that tight, but it's from 1 degree to 9 degrees. Mars. Mars in Scorpio. It's Mars in Scorpio retrograde. Mars in Scorpio is the rulership position. It's the classic position of what you might call feminine power. He has it in the 12th house. Now, retrograde is funny. A Mars in retrograde position tends to be a frustrating position in some ways because Mars likes to be out there. But retrograde means you feel it internally. So it's funny that it's in the 12th house of make-believe. This is someone who's very good at expressing violence, make-believe. Make-believe violence in the protection of the studio. This is something we've seen in so many of these actors. They have very, very powerful 12th house. It's the house of the studio, the house of the protected space. And they're really good there. The fact is retrograde is funny. It tends to make him kind of a gentler person than you would expect from that Sagittarius rising and the stuff in Gemini. They're not the most, they're sensitive, but they're not gentle by nature. But that Mars in Scorpio, he really uses his power effectively. The Saturn and Libra, the Neptune and Libra really balances his personality, makes him feel very part of his community around him. It's very important to him. The fact that the 3 planets in Gemini, Sun, Mercury, Venus, are generally trine the Saturn and the Neptune. It's a big air chart. This is a man of ideas. This is a man who thinks. This is a man who likes to discuss things. He's always interested in the idea behind it. I'm sure when he's considering a script, he's saying, what's the thinking that's going on behind this? What's this person thinking about as they're doing it? This is where he comes from at the beginning of it. The Mars in Scorpio shows this physicality. The Sagittarius Rising is something we've seen in a bunch of people who do action roles. It's because Sagittarius is a very athletic sign. And at the rising, it means they have a basic optimism. They like being outside. They like expressing themselves. Having the moon there means he's very good at getting his emotional nature into it. Remember, we oftentimes think of the moon as emotions. But keep in mind that emotions include the word motions. Motion, action. The moon is the fastest moving of the planets. So what happens is the moon has a lot to do with how do we move around? How do we use our energy in our spaces? And so the moon at the rising means he's someone he likes being involved with everything in a location. Sagittarius rising, of course, would also like to travel a great deal. What's interesting is 9th house, which is his 9th house of travel. He has Leo there. He has Pluto there as well, and the South Node. He would tend to, with Pluto, many times global issues come up. He would tend to travel globally, and he would tend to kind of travel royally. I mean, I'm sure he's always traveling in first class, and he's tall. I think he's 6'3" or 6'4" is my height. So he would tend to be traveling in first class a lot. I mean, he's a very wealthy man, very successful actor. I think we can definitely tell the difference, right, with Liam Neeson, right? But when he travels, it's the South Node there. In some ways, the traveling to him is something he does very easily, and it's also something that for him is, it's troublesome sometimes. It's, I have to do this again, kind of thing. What's interesting is that his North Node is in the 3rd house, along with his Juno and his Selena, which is a nodal point, in Aquarius. One of the ways that he really likes to kind of communicate and travel is probably over the web. He probably loves the internet. He probably loves the idea because there's so many ideas out there, and that's one thing he just loves. He loves ideas. He likes the physical activity. He likes the athletic performance of it. The Saturn and Neptune has a lot to do with his commitment to the arts. You're having a career in the arts. It's Saturn in retrograde. It's Neptune retrograde. It's an internal thing. The Mars is retrograde. There's a lot of depth to his personality. What's funny is that when you look at where the horizon line is, his sun is right at the descendant. It's right at the descendant. So with him, it's always about his partnerships. There's a good bit above in the sky above it, but there's a bunch underneath it, below the horizon as well, which means he's very balanced between what you see out there in the world and what his personal life is. With many of the modern actresses you saw who are, they're on social media all the time, their entire chart is above the horizon. Their whole life is lived out in the open. Then we find with the more classical actors, most of their life is actually out of sight, below the horizon, with one or two planets above. You see them through their work. A lot of times it's Saturn. You see them through their work, or their Jupiter. But with him, he's very balanced between the two. This is a very balanced personality, as full moon personalities oftentimes are. So it's a very interesting chart. It's interesting. The Saturn in Libra retrograde would incline him to have a very long career. He would tend to come into his greater success later in life. And he's going to be 70 in 2022, and he's still doing movies. He's still doing action movies, which is really kind of remarkable. Usually action movies is a young man's job. I think Sean Connery, who did his portrait one time, when he was talking about who should play Bond, he said, well, it should be someone about 28. Because the character in the book is about 28, and all that type of physical activity and running and jumping and shooting, that's a man in those late 20s who's not afraid of death yet. Once you get older than that, well, then it starts changing. And Liam Neeson, at 70, approaching 70, he's probably known a lot of people who are no longer around. He understands that death is a factor. So usually you don't see that older people in that many action roles. But Saturn, Neptune, in the same house with the midheaven retrograde. And it's interesting, the midheaven is at 22 degrees. This is the final point. 22 degrees Libra is within 1 degree of Spica. And when you have Spica at the midheaven, people tend to be very prolific. The royal star Spica. And he has been that. So that's the chart of Liam Neeson. Hope you found it interesting. I liked it a lot. He's in my generation, our generation. And so until next time, make sure you come and see us at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, hit that little red button, and you can find the forecasts on Friday for the coming week, and you can find the portraits every Tuesday. You can also come see us at planetarycalendar.com, where you can find our calendars. This is the 2022 calendar, but who knows what year you're watching this in. We have it in the little version, we have the medium version, and the big version, like the 3 bears. And then, of course, we also have a day planner and the digital version. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars and imagining what your fate might be. Enjoy.